lot at night.
Yeah, mine are closed.
Oh, we're live. So I guess that means we're beginning. Hello, everybody. You are live with Heather Moore and Julie Wright. We are excited to be here with you. We are going to talk about all things books and writing today. So let's get started. First off, Heather, I'm going to ask you a question really fast.
Okay.
What is your favorite bad review that you've ever received?
I remember I wrote, it was actually a thriller kind of called Finding Sheba. And the review, so like on Amazon or some of the other places where you could review, there's like a title to the review. And it said, a woman wrote this, question mark, exclamation point, and then just like a whole row of them. And I'm like, and I think this, I can't remember the stars. I mean, usually if it's like a 1 or 2 star review, sometimes I rarely read those because they're usually not your audience anyway. And also if you are traditionally publishing, you can't necessarily change anything in the book, at least what they're complaining about. So, and I did read it and they were upset because they felt like the one of the female characters wasn't making the choices she should have been making, and which can kind of be a common theme sometimes if you have someone that's going through some struggles and they have to rely on someone else until they become the person they are at the end of the book. So it was fine. But I just remember seeing that and I felt insulted because I didn't know why they're picking on my gender. How about you, Julie?
Oh gosh, mine was favorite. It was a 2-star review, and the whole review was one sentence is, "I can't believe I made it through this boring book." Which but it's 2 stars, and you know how on Goodreads it's got the little 2 stars is it was okay, that was the thing, and so it was okay, and then the review is, "I can't believe I made it through this boring book," and I laughed. Well, at first my knee-jerk reaction was, "What, you called my book boring? I'm so offended." But then after a second I just busted up laughing. I'm like, if you really thought it was that boring, girl,
Yeah,
you
it's okay to not.
it's okay to not. There's no book police. It's going to be like alarms are not going to go off if you close the book and walk away. It's fine. You're okay. So it was just really funny. Oh, I should have, I had said who we were. So Heather Moore wrote the amazing book Under the Java Moon, which is a great story. We're going to talk about that. She's going to tell you a little bit about that. And I am the writer of Swimming in a Sea of Stars. We've actually, both of us, written many, many books. I've got a couple of dozen that I've written. Heather, I don't even know how many you've written. How many?
I don't know either. We both don't know.
We really don't know. I'm over 25 at this point. I'm not really sure anymore. I know for sure. Once I hit 25, I just kind of stopped counting. It's like, I've written a thing. But our newest ones are Under the Java Moon and Swimming in a Sea of Stars, which is super fun. Heather, tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, first I wanted to say that Julie and we swapped our manuscripts before we submitted to our publisher. So Shadow Mountain Publishing is our publisher. And so Julie got to read Under the Java Moon a full year in advance. And I got to read Swimming in the Sea of Stars probably at least a year in advance, maybe. Yeah. So it was really fun to see them come out. And then I also listened to the audio when it did come out because I'm like a huge audio reader. And when Julie and I were doing this fun little book tour in Southern California a few weeks ago, or actually it's probably been like 6 weeks now, is Julie was telling me, well, I don't really listen to my audios or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, and I just push play on the car theme. And so she got to hear a little bit about it, but the narrator is great. So if you are an audio reader, both of them have wonderful narrators in them. So I do get this question a lot is, why did I write Under the Java Moon? Or how did I come across the story? I've read tons of World War II books, dozens of them over the years. I've read them set in all settings. I've never read a book set in Indonesia. And so when my publisher contacted me about possibly writing this story, they told me that the woman, her name is Marie, but she goes by Rita in the book. She was interested in doing a memoir, but the publisher was saying, well, we could offer you a historical novel. And so I met with her, and she's a little bit leery about maybe turning her story into historical fiction, because in her mind, she's like, this story is true. It really happened to me. I went through it. My family went through it. And I said, yeah, I'm going to keep everything that happened to you in there, but I'm going to be embellishing the dialogue. I'm going to be creating plot situations. And since she was a little girl, I'm going to be obviously doing more research and adding things in that maybe she didn't remember, or maybe didn't technically happen to her, but happened inside the camp. And so I just remember that first meeting. This was August 2021, so over 2 years ago, just sitting there and listening to her tell this story that I had no idea. I did not know. I knew of the Dutch East Indies like anciently, because it was like it was the big trading route that they're part of. But I didn't realize that they had continued to occupy or colonize the Indonesian island, which is called the Dutch East Indies, and went all the way up through 1949. It was colonized. And so during the war, when Japan invaded, because everybody was declaring war on Japan and vice versa, and so Japan invaded Indonesia, and until the Dutch, capitulated. I think it's capitulated. Anyway, basically surrendered. And so all the Dutch throughout Indonesia, and there's thousands of islands and there's hundreds of camps, they all were put into these camps for the rest of the war, which was another 3+ years. And so the men were separated from the women and children. And I just was sitting there thinking, how did I not know this? I knew nothing. I had read the Unbroken. I had read A Town Like Alice, and those both take place in the Pacific Rim. And there's obviously films about different parts of the war there. And so I always thought I was too intimidated to write a World War II novel, because there's so many and they're so well done and there's so much research. But I thought, this is a story that has not been told, and I think it needs to be told. Not necessarily that I'm like the perfect person to tell it, but since my publisher had kind of put us together, I had this opportunity that, as long as Marie/Rita agreed, which she did in January, she took a little time. She took her time to like weigh it, and it was just more on her part, because it was a huge commitment to be vulnerable like that and to share her story so openly like that, and just have everyone, her friends and family alike, to find out, what she really went through, because it's a very traumatic and private time for her. And one way that she kind of got through that was by keeping it in her past and not dwelling on it, and just moving forward in her life and looking through the front view window. Anyway, but I would love, and I know I've heard a little bit from Julie, because we were traveling and talking to a lot of people at bookstores, but I'd just love to hear what kind of brought you to write in this Swimming in a Sea of Stars.
Okay, so, well, before I go into that, I just want to just say about Under a Java Moon. I love reading Heather's books because I always feel smarter after I've done them. And this was also, for me, it was also a story I had never heard before. I didn't have any idea that any of that had taken place. I mean, I thought I knew a lot about World War II. I've studied a lot about it. And so it was amazing. And I think Marie's story is just really, it was heartbreaking and beautiful and poignant and heart pounding as well. There's a lot of things going on where you're like, oh my gosh, run, where it was like, oh wow, it was great. So just wanted to put that out there, because it was such a well done story. And I do think you are probably the best person to write this story. You did a great job. So, but for swimming, you're welcome. It's true. It's true. You're my hero because it's true. But in Swimming in a Sea of Stars, I started writing this book. So, okay, the reason I started writing this book, honestly, for being 100% honest, is because my son one day came to me, and this is many years ago, and he said, I want you to write a book. I have a book idea for you. I'm like, okay. Spell what you got. And he's like, what if he's like, just hear me out. What if you have a character where they go through a whole day, it all takes place in one day, and you go through a whole day and nothing happens. Okay, go write it. And I'm like, hey, well, there's no such thing as a day where nothing happens. It doesn't exist. I'm like, so, okay, I can write that. Like, challenge accepted. And I write, I love writing for young adults. It's a place where I feel like I gravitate to. I enjoy hanging out with youth. I love our youth. I think that they're funny and interesting. And I think we worry a lot about the future, but the future's in good hands. I think the youth are far more capable than people give them credit for. They're really great. And something I've noticed though is that our world is so complicated and so difficult and filled with so many different facets of hard things that I feel like our youth are dealing with things that we don't understand. And as grown-ups, we're not dealing with those same things, and we are leaking out our youth due to suicide, and we're losing them because life is just really hard, and they deal with things we don't even have any comprehension of, and their lives are difficult, and suicide's become a real issue for them. And so I wanted to write a story that maybe gave them some hope in giving tomorrow a chance, because tomorrow's not, every day is not going to be a bad day. We're going to have good days too. There's good days to come. If you just stick it out through the bad stuff, you're going to get good again. And I wanted to write a book that reflected that. So I did a lot of research and spent a lot of time talking to youth. I speak a lot to at various schools and whatnot. And I just pulled their stories out. And that was how I was able to curate these 4 students. Well, 5, because you also have Addison, she tried to commit suicide, but didn't succeed. And it is her first day back at school. So that's basically what the story is about, is Addison. She tried to commit suicide, but didn't succeed. And it's her first day back. She's terrified. She's worried. She's stressed out. And her therapist tells her, anytime you're worried or stressed out, write it down in your journal and we'll talk about it when we meet again. But so each chapter begins with her journal entry, but the chapter isn't about her. It's from the point of view of one of 4 other students, that because she existed in the school that day, their lives were made better. So the whole point is just give tomorrow a chance and understand that you have more value than you think, and you are more visible than you think.
I love that, because even though it is a young adult novel about high schoolers, I feel like I related to, because as you know, we all go through these periods in our life where we're trying to find validation or purpose or motivation for different things. We go through different transitions. And so I felt like I was relating to these characters. And plus it was eye-opening to me because there's so much around us that we don't see, because we might just be focused on our own family, our own group of friends, our own job, our own classes, where everyone that is around us, we just, as we're doing errands or we're out traveling, everybody has a story and everybody is struggling with something. And so it just kind of reemphasized how important it was for us just to look for the good and to be compassionate and to give grace to other people.
Yeah, it was a hard story to write, but also it is something I'm really glad I've done. And I've gotten a lot of really great feedback. It's been interesting, the young adults who have written to me since the book has come out, and the emails I've received where they're like, this helped me to decide to stick it out for a little while longer. So yeah. It's been really rewarding that way.
Yeah, that is so amazing. I love that. So I have a question for you, Julie. Okay. So this is probably one that authors get a lot, but I am always super interested in what another writer's writing process is. So I assume you're in your office. Are you, let me lock myself down in my office, or do you go someplace else, or do you just write in between a million other things? How do you work?
I write in between a million things. Honestly, lately, because I have had such a hard time sitting down and focusing, I take my phone, my little trusty little phone here, and I go for a walk. I take the dog. So, and I just do voice to text, because my hands sometimes don't work very well. I have multiple sclerosis, so sometimes my hands don't function properly. And I'm a little extra spastic. I move around a lot more because my nerves are constantly hurting. But I am calmer and able to focus better when I'm moving. So I take my phone and I voice to text just in a Google Docs. I just use the little phone thing. I don't have any special programs or anything fancy. It's just my Google Docs and my walk and my dog. And so sometimes, I'll be going along and in my manuscript, it'll have something like, no, stop that, put that down, because I'm yelling at the dog while I'm writing, which is always fun. Or when I'm walking past somebody and I'm like, hey, how you doing? Have a good morning or whatever. And so I can go through at the end of a writing session, I have to go through and I have to find all those places where I either yelled at the dog or I told him he was a good boy, or I greeted a neighbor or got honked at by somebody because I wasn't paying attention and walked in the road.
And then screaming.
Exactly. Couple of cuss words. I'm like, edit, delete. And so, yeah, it's a fun time. So my writing process is, I do have an office and I do use it a lot more often than I ever used to, but I found that I now walk to write. And I know you are like a machine. You are, I don't even know how you focus the way you do. You are amazing.
I feel like in the last couple of years, well, especially since, everything 2020, right? We all point to that. But I feel like 2020 was hard because I was home and I didn't have an option to go to the library. My high schooler was home and my husband was home. So we're all in the house and it's fine. We could all retreat to our little corners. But then I felt like I was cooking 3 meals a day. And I'm finally I had to say, okay, I'll make dinner. I'm fine. Or, if you guys want to make it, that's fine, whatever. But as far as any organized meal, it's just going to be dinner. Everyone is just on their own for everything else. And that really helped because then I felt like I was just, doing kitchen work all day. Because, by the time, and obviously it was, since you are kind of stuck at home, you're more willing to really cook and do recipes and stuff like that and not just grab a sandwich and then go finish your errands. But kind of since then, I've learned to write in my car a lot. And I do go to the library almost every day. Usually, this might gross people out, but I go work out and then without coming home, because if I come home, everything gets distracted and then I go to the library, still my workout clothes and I try to get my word count in. Some days I'm just not as focused as I want to be, but I'll get maybe half my word count in and then I go home, shower, eat, all that stuff. And then I try to get back to my word count or just do other stuff, with marketing. And of course, there's always family stuff in between all of that.
So what is your word count goal for a day?
When I'm actively writing, it's usually 2,000 words a day. For historical, that can be like a 5 to 6 hour thing. For maybe contemporary, where I'm not having to do as much research, it can just be a couple hours. So,
right.
What about you? Do you have a word count goal, or do you just
when I'm actively writing, it's 2,000 words a day. Right now, I'm at 3,000 words a day because I'm on a deadline.
I've done it a few times, and things kind of when you're and it's weird because you think you could technically just do that in a few hours, right? If you were just focused and you kind of know where the plot's going for that day. But it's amazing how many other things you're kind of letting slide.
Oh yeah, my floors. If somebody wants to hire me a maid right now, I'd be down with that. Just saying.
Yeah. So definitely that. So yeah. So I had another question too. So when did you first start writing and thinking I want to actually write a novel and have it published? And then when did you actually get published?
Okay. So when I decided to be a writer, so if you go through my homework assignments from as early as kindergarten on I want to be when I grow up, and then they have a blank space. I always had writer in there, always, inevitably. And it was funny because I don't remember ever making these assignments, but I found some even the other day. I was going through one of my dad's boxes and he had some stuff, and on there's another assignment that says I'm going to be a writer. So clearly this is my destiny. But the day I consciously made a decision was when I was 15 years old, had a really crummy English teacher he just liked the popular kids, and I was not that kid. So teachers should not do that. We little wallflowers have enough problems with the students who are the popular kids. We don't need the teachers dealing with that too. That's just not cool. But he told me I would never be a writer, which I thought was kind of a horrible thing for a teacher to say. not exactly inspiring. And I thought, oh, I am going to prove you wrong, you punk. So I started my first book at that point. I'd made a decision that this was something I was going to do. And it took me a few years to finish it because I was 15 at the time. I was a child. And focus is not exactly that, but I did finish after a few years, and I finished my first book, and I'm like, ah, look, see, take that, Mr. Cowden. And then, I stayed on my hard drive for a long time until even after I was married, that thing was still on my hard drive, and I just stopped writing. I wrote a book and then stopped writing anything else, which is just super stupid. But I had no direction, didn't know what to do with it. I'd written the book. I did what I said I was going to do. I finished the book. And then every time my husband would mess with the computer as he was trying to learn programming and all that stuff, he would completely erase the hard drive and start over again all the time, just to try out different things and files. And he's just a nerdy little guy who loves that sort of thing. And he speaks in zeros and ones. He speaks binary. It is totally his language. And he does that, and I would panic at him. I'm like, you're gonna lose my life's work. And I would call it that, my life's work, which is hilarious to me now. And one day he threw my coat at me, and I'm like, where are we going? And he's like, we're going to the bookstore. I'm like, I like that. So I'm like, woohoo, grab the checkbook and we're going to the bookstore. And because I'm old and we used checkbooks back then. And we go to the bookstore, and instead of buying anything, he would just open up books that were like the one I had written, and he would copy out all of the little publishing information. He'd put the book back on the shelf, and I'm like, we're not buying that? Why are we not buying that? And we were not there to buy. We did not leave the bookstore with anything because he was grouchy. And, what is that? And he said, if it is on a shelf and not on my hard drive, you will stop being grouchy about this. And I'm like, oh. So he started submitting for me.
Nice.
And that was how I got published for the first time, was because, and all of a sudden I started getting letters in, and I got a few rejection letters, and I cried and cried and cried and said, see, this is why I couldn't do this. See? And then one day, one of the letters wasn't a rejection. And then the publisher, after they done the contract and everything, they're like, okay, so we're looking at this and this date for your next book. When can we expect to see that? I'm like, next book? Yeah, I will have that done soon. I'm really close to being finished. A book I had not even thought of yet. I'm like, I will get that to you. And so then I was off and writing. So what about you?
Yeah, so my experience is a little different, but similarity as well is I was helping my grandma write her personal history, and I was 30 years old with a couple little kids, and actually 3 little kids. And I was just driving up to her house, about 30-minute drive once a week. And I just had a story idea from the World War II era, ironically. And I thought, oh, what if I just write a little short story and submit to a magazine? And I hadn't really thought, writing a book, writing a novel. So I started writing this short story, and it just got longer and longer and longer, and had like the giant, big, fat monitor computer thing. And sometimes things would save and sometimes it wouldn't. And if I wanted to print out, it was like the dot matrix printer with the little holes on the side. The border. Anyway, so I was writing, and it just kept going and going, and it ended up being 300 pages. And I literally did not know what to do with it. Anyway, so during this time of writing, helping my grandma, and it was about a young woman, and I can't remember what city or town, but she ends up going into France, becoming a nurse during World War II. But it's probably all totally not researched, right? Haven't looked at it. Anyway, so, and in the meantime, one of my neighbors gave me a book by a Utah author, and he's a New York Times bestseller. And I was like, oh, I didn't know New York Times bestselling authors could live in Utah. I thought they lived in New York or LA. I thought they're like Mary Higgins Clark, who wore pearls in her author picture, and they had like dinner parties, and I just thought it was like not even possible. So anyway, so I thought, oh, well, there's a Utah author. And every time I went to like a Utah bookstore, you know, one owned by a Utah publisher, I was there to buy things that weren't novels, right? Anyway, so I started, there's no Google back then, but I went onto the World Wide Web and I dialed in, because you had to dial up into the internet, and there's all this for, you know, a good 5 or 10 minutes. So you would go make yourself a sandwich or go tell the kids to stop fighting, you know, then you come back and then now you're online. Anyway, so I found that there was a writers group meeting not too far from me. It's at the Provo Library, for those who know the Utah geography. And they met once a month, and they heard from a guest speaker. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. The next meeting, this was like the fall. The next meeting, there's a couple months off, was going to be January. And I think it was 2001. And the guest speaker was going to be a guy named Jeff Savage, who went by Jeffrey S. Savage. And anyway, so I went to that meeting, and I just remember sitting the very back, because I'm a back row person, especially if I didn't know anybody. And he was up there talking about how he got his first book published. And it was really interesting, because he was saying, and then I, you know, wrote this book and I didn't know where to submit it. And finally I found, you know, a local Utah publisher. I'm like, there's Utah publishers like who publish novels? Like, I was so naive and dumb. Anyway, so for whatever reason, as I was sitting back there listening to him speak, and Jeff's a great guy, right? But for some reason I thought, well, if he can do it, I can do it. So I went home.
Amazing.
And I was telling my husband, yeah, this guy named Jeff Savage and blah, blah, blah. He's like, Jeff Savage? I know a Jeff Savage. And we used to work at this company together. We're software sales guys together. Anyway, so it turns out that Jeff and my husband knew each other years ago, whatever. You know, it's not like they're best friends, obviously. Maybe they had each other's emails. I don't know. Back then, if you had someone's email, that meant you're in contact with each other, or pager numbers, of course. Anyway, so that was kind of the journey of, and there's a whole huge story behind it took me another 3 to 4 years to actually finally get published in more books I've written. But that was like my first introduction to like the publishing world, like seeing it was like a real thing, as a viable thing. And then maybe I could dip my toe into it.
And you are so amazing now with it. I just love your career, is just a thing of fascination to me. And it doesn't matter what genre you're writing in. Everything is so well done. It's well thought out. It's well plotted. The characters are just 10 out of 10. I just love that about you. You were so good. And it doesn't matter what genre you go into. It's like, I know that if I pick up a book that is yours, I'm going to love it. And it doesn't matter what it is you're writing. And I'm not a huge fan of historical fiction per se. It's not.
What?
I know. Shh. But I love yours. So
like
maybe I am a fan and I just don't know. I don't know. You put it out to me in a way that I feel smarter. I feel edified. I walk away and I love the characters. You bring these characters in such a rich and real way that, just guys, if you're watching this and you have an opportunity to read Heather's books, yes, you should.
Well, thank you, Julie. You're very nice. And you were actually someone I looked up to for a long time, because when I did start going to writers' conferences, you already had a couple books out and you were just like, oh my gosh, like someone who walked around with like this glow about you. I'm like, how do I get to know that girl that's just smiling and giggling over there with all those friends of hers? Anyway, so I finally got to join the Code Club and get published. But let's just do one more question, because I think we're going to tire out our readers. And ironically, even though Julie and I went on this road trip and we spent almost a full week together talking all the time, I feel like I still could just talk to Julie for like 3 more hours. So that's why I'm limiting us to one more question. So the question was that if you could live in any of the worlds you have written, which one would you choose?
Oh, you know, what's funny is honestly, I would live in Spell Check. It's a young adult magical novel about a girl who discovers that she has inherited magic from the ancient trolls of Sweden. And she has to go through the troll trials, the witch trials. She lives in Salem, Massachusetts, which, you know, I know the cliche of it all, which is why it's funny. The first line in that book is, it's a little known fact that witches are alive and well in Salem, Massachusetts. They call themselves cheerleaders. And it just made me laugh when I wrote it. I still think it's funny all these years later. And it's just a fun, magical, it's a feel good, fun book with lots of heart. And I just love the relationship between this girl and her grandma in there. And I love I love that whole story, and I would live in that world any day. I have other books that I love probably more that I've written, but as far as living in those worlds, I don't want to live in those worlds. That world is awful.
I know, right?
It's terrifying. I don't want to live in that crazy place.
And I'm not going back to high school.
Then straight up, not a chance. I did my time. I'm out. I'm done. I'm free. So yeah, but spell check was one that's a world I could totally live in. That was a great world. So what about you? Where would you live?
Well, as I was thinking about this question, I had one answer, but as you're talking, I came up with a different answer. Because like you, there's a lot of books I've written that I do not want to live in them at all. But you and I, we did this cute little project together once called, the first book was called The Fortune Cafe. And then we did 3 more. We just created this little small town scenario, on a beach town. And they'll have a little bit of magic realism. So in the Fortune Cafe, when you open up your fortune cookie, your fortune will come true. So that would just be kind of a fun. And then there's one book with a wishing well, and your wishes really do come true. So a little bit of fantasy, but not like fantasy with like scary, whatever monsters.
You're not going to have to go to mortal in those books.
But, by the beach, just, something that is just kind of a relaxing with some cool stuff going on. And, very eclectic people, like the bookstore owner and just different things around the town would be fun. So
I would live there. That's a good place to live too. If we could be neighbors, I'm in. I want to live in that book.
Okay. For sure.
If you should be your neighbor in that book, I'm in. Let's do it.
Well, thanks everyone. It's great to have you here, and we hope you have a great rest of your week.
We do. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.